The blood-red horizon burned like wildfire as Kaya Osage watched the sun set from the ridge overlooking the sprawling prairie. She knew she shouldn't be this far from her people's camp, but the weight of her existence, the crushing burden of being untouchable, sometimes drove her to seek solitude where judgment couldn't reach. Arizona Territory, 1872, was an unforgiving place for everyone, but for a woman branded as she was, it was a special kind of hell. Kaya's fingers traced the small blue crescent moon tattooed beneath her left eye, the mark that sealed her fate among the Dene people. The sacred mark that once honored her as chosen by the spirits, now condemned her as untouchable after the massacre. No one would meet her eyes directly. No one would accept food from her hands. No one would touch her skin for fear the death that surrounded her would seep into their own lives. She heard the horse before she saw it, the steady rhythm of hooves against hard-packed earth approaching from the west. Instinct told her to disappear, to melt into the landscape as her people had taught her. But something kept her rooted in place, watching as the figure on horseback materialized from the golden haze of sunset. Preston Adams rode with the easy confidence of a man who knew the land but respected its dangers. His worn leather hat cast a shadow over eyes that had seen too much for his 26 years. The cattle drive to Santa Fe was still 2 days away, but he'd ridden ahead to scout the trail and find water. He hadn't expected to find a woman alone on the ridge, especially not a native woman staring at him with such intensity it made his skin prickle. He slowed his horse, keeping a respectful distance. "Evening," he called, tipping his hat slightly. "Don't mean to intrude on your land." Kaya stood perfectly still, her dark hair whipping around her face in the evening breeze. She understood his English, but chose not to respond. Every interaction with outsiders had ended in pain for her people. This cowboy would be no different. "I'm just passing through," Preston continued, dismounting slowly to appear less threatening. "Looking for good water for a herd coming through. Name's Preston Adams." He kept his hands visible, away from the pistol on his hip. "This is not good land to pass through," Kaya finally spoke, her English carrying the musical cadence of her native tongue. "Your cattle will find little water, and what they find may be claimed by others who will not welcome you." Preston's eyebrows rose in surprise, both at her perfect English and her warning. "You have a name I might address you by, madam?" "Names have power," she replied, taking a step back, "and I have been stripped of mine." The fading light caught the blue crescent beneath her eye. "That's a mighty sad thing," Preston said softly. "Everyone deserves a name." "I'm called Kaya," she finally offered, watching his reaction carefully. "But my people call me nothing at all. I'm untouchable." Preston's brow furrowed. "Untouchable? I don't understand." "It is better that way," she said, turning to leave. "Find another route for your cattle, cowboy. This one brings only sorrow." "Wait," Preston called, taking an instinctive step forward. "At least let me thank you for the warning." Kaya paused, looking back over her shoulder. No one had thanked her for anything in years. The simple courtesy felt alien, dangerous even. But something in the cowboy's open face made her hesitate just long enough for their eyes to lock properly for the first time. Preston saw pain there, and pride, and a loneliness that matched his own. Before he could say another word, she was gone, disappearing into the growing darkness with ghost-like efficiency. That night, as Preston made camp alone under stars that seemed impossibly bright, he couldn't shake the image of the woman on the ridge. Kaya, she had called herself. Untouchable, she had said. The contradiction of her beauty and her isolation gnawed at him as he stared into his small campfire. Little did he know that just beyond the flickering light's reach, Kaya watched him from the shadows, equally unable to understand why she hadn't simply walked away and never looked back. Morning brought clarity to the eastern sky, but none to Kaya's thoughts as she slipped back to her people's camp before dawn. The elders would be displeased that she had ventured so far alone, but they would not search for her. In truth, her absence often seemed to relieve the tribe, one less reminder of the tragedy that had befallen them. The camp was already stirring when she arrived. Children darted between lodges, women prepared morning meals, and hunters readied themselves for the day. No one acknowledged her return. When she passed, conversations faltered, then resumed once she was beyond earshot. Only the very young children sometimes forgot and smiled at her before being hushed by watchful mothers. Kaya made her way to her small lodge at the camp's edge. Inside, she tended to her meager possessions: a few clay pots, a worn blanket, tools for tanning hides, and a small medicine pouch containing herbs and sacred items. This was all she had to show for 22 years of life. She emerged carrying a water basket, heading toward the stream. The women already there subtly shifted away as she approached, creating an invisible boundary that everyone respected. Kaya filled her basket in silence, used to the treatment but never immune to its sting. Elder Maska, one of the few who occasionally spoke directly to her, approached as she finished. His weathered face was grave, his eyes troubled. "There are cowboys coming with many cattle," he said without greeting. "Did you see them in your wanderings?" Kaya lowered her gaze. "I saw one, a scout. I warned him to find another path." "Did he see you? Did he know you are Diné?" The old man's voice held urgency. "Yes. We spoke briefly." She did not mention how the cowboy's eyes had held no fear or disgust when looking at her marked face. Maska sighed heavily. "These are difficult times. The white men push us into smaller spaces each season. We cannot afford conflicts." He paused, studying her. "Perhaps your warning will turn them away." "Perhaps," Kaya agreed, though something told her Preston Adams was not a man easily deterred. The thought brought an unexpected flutter to her chest. Maska nodded once and turned to leave, then hesitated. "The council believes the cattle might provide an opportunity. We need supplies, medicines. Trading would be better than taking." Kaya understood the unspoken request. Despite being untouchable within the tribe, she was often sent as messenger or negotiator with outsiders who didn't understand the significance of her mark. Her English and her understanding of white ways made her useful, if not respected. "You wish me to speak with them?" she asked. "If they come, yes. Tell them we offer safe passage for fair trade." Kaya nodded, accepting the task without enthusiasm. Interactions with outsiders were always fraught with danger, especially for a woman alone. Yet she couldn't deny a small, traitorous part of her that wondered if she might encounter Preston Adams again. Miles away, Preston rejoined the cattle drive, reporting to the trail boss about the terrain ahead. "Water's scarce, but there's enough if we're careful," he explained, riding alongside Marcus Bennett, a hard man with 20 years of cattle driving etched into the lines of his face. "There's a Navajo settlement about 2 days ahead. Might be wise to negotiate passage rather than push through." Bennett spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Negotiating costs time and money, Adams. Why pay when we can just drive through?" "Because that's how conflicts start," Preston replied evenly. "And conflicts get men killed." "You gone soft on me, boy? Getting spooked by a few Indians?" Bennett's laugh was harsh in the morning light. Preston kept his face neutral. "Just being practical. Dead cowboys don't deliver cattle." Bennett considered this, chewing thoughtfully. "Fine. You're so concerned. You can do the talking when we get there. But I'm not paying any tribute to pass on open land." Preston nodded, hiding his relief. At least this gave him a chance to prevent bloodshed. And if he was honest with himself, a chance to see the mysterious woman again. The cattle drive moved slowly, a massive organism of dust and noise winding through the landscape. Nearly 2,000 head of longhorns, 15 cowboys, and supply wagons created a traveling ecosystem that transformed the quiet prairie into a thundering mass. Preston rode flank, keeping stragglers in line while scanning the horizon. Every ridge, every outcropping of rock made him wonder if Kaya was watching. By evening of the second day, the distant smoke of the Navajo camp became visible. Bennett called a halt while they were still a good distance away. "Adams, right ahead. See what we're dealing with. If they seem hostile, get back here fast. We'll change course if necessary." Preston nodded, reining his horse away from the herd. The sunset painted the landscape in fiery colors as he approached the camp alone, his stomach tight with anticipation that had little to do with potential danger and everything to do with the woman who had occupied his thoughts for 2 days straight. He was halfway to the camp when a figure materialized before him, seeming to rise from the earth itself. Kaya stood in his path, her long dark hair adorned with a single eagle feather, her dress of buckskin and cloth a blend of traditional and practical. The blue crescent beneath her eye seemed to glow in the fading light. "You did not heed my warning," she said, her voice carrying a hint of accusation. Preston reined his horse to a stop. Sometimes a man has to follow the path set before him, even when warned against it. "Even if that path leads to danger?" "Especially then," he replied, dismounting to stand before her. "The trail boss sent me to talk. I'd rather negotiate than fight." Kaya's expression remained unreadable. "My elders sent me for the same purpose." "Then we're already in agreement on something," Preston said, offering a smile. "That's a promising start." For a moment, something like amusement flickered across Kaya's face before disappearing behind her careful mask. "The council will allow your cattle to pass through our territory and use the water at Silver Creek. In exchange, they request medicines, flour, coffee, and 2 cattle for meat." Preston considered. Bennett wouldn't like giving up any cattle, but 2 from 2,000 was negligible. "I believe those terms are fair. I'll need to consult with my trail boss, but I'll advocate for acceptance." Kaya nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "Why do you look at me directly when others of my tribe will not?" The question caught Preston off guard with its bluntness. "Should I not?" "I told you I'm untouchable," she said quietly. "My people believe death follows me. The mark below my eye once meant I was blessed by spirits, chosen to be a healer. Now it marks me as one who brings misfortune." Preston studied the crescent thoughtfully. "Where I come from, people are judged by their actions, not by marks on their skin." "And where's that place where people are so wise?" A touch of bitterness edged her words. "Kansas, originally, though I wouldn't call us wise. Just practical." He paused. "What happened to change the meaning of your mark?" Kaya looked away, her profile sharp against the darkening sky. 5 years ago, I was learning healing ways under our medicine woman. We traveled to gather special herbs and were away when soldiers came to our camp. They said our people had stolen horses. It was not true, but truth mattered little to them." Preston felt a cold knot form in his stomach, knowing where this story was headed. "They killed 27 of our people, including my parents and brother." Her voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "When we returned, and I used my healing knowledge, no one could be saved. The survivors said the spirits had abandoned me, that my healing powers had turned to death. That I had been away because I was meant to die with them." "That's not fair," Preston said softly. "Fair?" Kaya's laugh held no humor. "What in your world or mine has ever been fair, Preston Adams?" The use of his name sent an unexpected warmth through him. "Not much," he admitted, "but that doesn't make it right. Right and wrong mean little when surviving is the task before you." She straightened her shoulders. "I will take your response to the council. Return tomorrow with your answer and the agreed-upon goods if your boss consents." Preston nodded, but as she turned to leave, he reached out impulsively, his fingers catching her wrist. The contact was brief, her skin warm against his, but the effect was electric. Kaya froze, her eyes widening in shock. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, releasing her. "I didn't think. No one has touched me in 5 years," she whispered, staring at her wrist where his fingers had been. "No one." Before Preston could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the gathering darkness with the same ghost-like efficiency as before. He stood there, his hands still tingling from the brief contact, realizing he had crossed a boundary he hadn't even known existed. Back at the cattle camp, Bennett listened to Preston's report with growing irritation. 2 head of cattle? For what? Permission to use land that doesn't belong to anyone? Preston kept his voice level. It belongs to them, whether the government recognizes it or not, and 2 cattle is a small price for peace. 2 cattle is 2 cattle, Bennett growled, plus supplies we need ourselves. We have extra medicines, plenty of flour, and more coffee than we need, Preston argued, and I'd rather give up 2 longhorns than lose more to a conflict or have to take a longer route that might dry up the whole herd. Several of the other cowboys nodded agreement. Bennett noticed and scowled, knowing he was outnumbered. Fine, he finally conceded, but you handle it. I don't want to see a single brave near my cattle or my men. Understood, Preston said, relief washing through him. He wouldn't admit, even to himself, how much of that relief came from knowing he would see Kaya again. That night, sleep eluded him. He lay beneath the vast sky, listening to the occasional lowing of cattle and the steady breathing of sleeping cowboys. His mind kept returning to the moment his fingers had touched Kaya's wrist, the look of shock on her face, the revelation that no one had touched her in 5 years. The thought of such isolation twisted something deep in his chest. Preston had known loneliness. After losing his family to influenza 3 years ago, he had drifted from ranch to ranch, drive to drive, forming no lasting connections. But at least he had casual contact, a handshake, a slap on the back, the press of bodies around a campfire. He couldn't imagine the isolation Kaya endured, surrounded by her own people, yet set apart. Morning came with a spectacular sunrise that painted the prairie in gold. Preston packed the agreed-upon supplies, selected 2 healthy but manageable yearling steers, and prepared to ride ahead of the herd. Bennett watched with barely concealed disapproval. Be back by noon, the trail boss ordered. We're moving through no matter what. Preston nodded. Knowing better than to argue further, he would make sure the passage was peaceful, regardless of Bennett's impatience. The Navajo camp was quiet as he approached, leading the 2 steers and with supplies packed on a second horse. Children stopped playing to stare, and adults watched with wary eyes as he was led to the council area, a circle of logs beneath a large cottonwood tree. 5 elders sat waiting, their faces impassive. Kaya stood to one side, her eyes downcast, her role clearly that of translator rather than participant. Preston removed his hat respectfully as the eldest man spoke. Kaya translated smoothly. Elder Mosca welcomes you and asks if you bring agreement to our terms. I do, Preston replied, gesturing to the cattle and supplies. Everything as requested. We ask for safe passage and access to Silver Creek for our herd. As Kaya translated, Preston noticed how the elders spoke directly to her but never quite looked at her face. The subtle distances they maintained, the way spaces around her remained empty, all confirmed her untouchable status. After some discussion, Mosca nodded and spoke again. He says your offering is accepted, Kaya translated. You may pass through their territory and water your cattle at Silver Creek, but they must be moved through quickly, and no hunting is permitted. Agreed, Preston said, relieved at the simplicity of the negotiation. We'll be through by tomorrow evening. More words were exchanged, and then the elders stood, signaling the end of the council. As they dispersed, Preston remained, unsure of protocol. Is there anything else? He asked Kaya when they were relatively alone. No, the agreement is made. She finally looked up, meeting his eyes. You should return to your herd. And what happens to you now? The question seemed to surprise her. I continue as I have. I exist at the edges. That's no way to live, he said softly. It is the only way I know. A flash of defiance crossed her features. I am alive when many are not. I do not complain of my fate. There are other places, Preston said, the words forming before he'd fully considered them. Places where no one knows of your mark or cares what it means. Kaya's laugh was soft but bitter. And where would those be? With white settlers who see my skin and assume enemy? With other tribes who would see me as Dene and therefore not their concern? There are no places for someone like me, Preston Adams. There could be, he insisted, stepping closer than propriety allowed, if you wanted it badly enough. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in her eyes. Hope, perhaps, or longing before she shuddered it away. "You should go. The cattle wait for no man, as you say." "That's not what we say, but close enough." Preston smiled, trying to recapture the moment of connection. "Will I see you again before we move on?" Kaya hesitated, clearly fighting some internal battle. "I will be at Silver Creek at sunset, to ensure the agreement is honored." Preston understood the words beneath the words. "Then I'll be there too, to represent the Cowboy's interests." A ghost of a smile touched her lips before she turned away, walking back toward the camp where people subtly shifted to maintain their distance from her. Preston watched her go, aware he was stepping onto dangerous ground. His interest in this woman went beyond simple attraction or even compassion. Something about her called to him in ways he couldn't explain: her strength, her dignity in the face of isolation, the brief glimpses of vulnerability she allowed him to see. He returned to the cattle drive with the news that passage was granted. Bennett seemed surprised but pleased at the lack of complications. "We'll start moving the herd within the hour," the trail boss decided. "Get them to the Silver Creek by nightfall, water them, and be on our way by morning." Preston nodded, already calculating how to ensure he would be at the creek at sunset. "I'll ride flank on the approach," he offered. "Make sure we don't stray onto any sacred areas." Bennett eyed him suspiciously but agreed. "Just keep them moving. I want this territory behind us." The massive herd began its lumbering progress toward the Navajo lands, creating a moving river of dust, hide, and horns. Preston rode the eastern flank, constantly scanning the landscape. Several times he thought he glimpsed a solitary figure watching from distant ridges, but he couldn't be certain. By late afternoon, the lead cattle reached Silver Creek, a modest stream cutting through a shallow valley lined with cottonwoods and willows. The cowboys established a rough camp upstream while the cattle were driven in controlled groups to drink. The operation was methodical chaos, with riders constantly moving to maintain order and prevent trampling at the water's edge. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Preston handed his duties to another rider and made his way downstream, away from the main watering area. His heart beat faster as he rounded a bend in the creek and saw her. Kaya sat on a large flat rock beside the water, her hair unbound and flowing down her back, her feet bare and dipped into the creek. She looked younger, softer somehow, away from the watchful eyes of her tribe. "You came," she said without turning, somehow sensing his presence. "I said I would." Preston dismounted, ground tying his horse before approaching. "May I join you?" She nodded, making space on the rock. When he sat beside her, he was careful to maintain a small distance, remembering her reaction to his touch. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, watching the water flow past and the sky transform into brilliant oranges and purples. Finally, Kaya spoke. "Why are you here, Preston Adams? Truly?" "Right now, because you are," he answered honestly. "That is not an answer." "It's the only one I have." He turned to look at her profile, admiring the straight line of her nose, the curve of her lips. "I've been drifting for years, moving from place to place, never settling. But when I saw you on that ridge 2 days ago, something changed. I don't understand it myself." Kaya studied the water rippling over her feet. "In my people's stories, there are spirits who recognize each other across many lifetimes, old souls who find each other again and again." "Is that what you think this is?" Preston asked quietly. "I think you are a cowboy who will be gone tomorrow," she replied. But the sadness in her voice belied the practical words. "What if I wasn't?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "What are you saying?" "I don't know," Preston admitted. "I just know I can't stop thinking about you, about how unfair your situation is, about how someone marked as a healer should be honored, not isolated." "Life is rarely fair," Kaya reminded him, but her voice had softened. "It can be fairer than this." Slowly, telegraphing his movements, Preston reached for her hand resting on the rock between them. "May I?" Kaya hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. When his fingers closed around hers, she trembled but didn't pull away. The simple contact, flesh against flesh, warmth against warmth, seemed profoundly intimate after years of isolation. "Tell me about your life before," Preston said gently. "Who were you before you became untouchable?" The question opened a floodgate. As the sunset deepened into twilight, Kaya spoke of her childhood running wild through canyons with her brother, learning healing herbs from her grandmother, the pride when the medicine woman chose her as apprentice and marked her with the blue crescent. She described the joy of belonging, the security of community, the simple pleasure of human touch. As darkness fell, Preston shared his own stories growing up on a small Kansas farm, losing his parents and sister to illness, his aimless wandering since, seeking something he couldn't name. "We are both alone," Kaya observed, her hand still in his, "but different kinds of alone." "Maybe neither of us has to be anymore," Preston suggested, the words hanging between them, full of possibility and risk. Kaya withdrew her hand, standing abruptly. "It grows late. Your cattle drive will leave at dawn." "Kaya." "This was a moment outside of time," she said firmly. "Tomorrow you return to your world, and I to mine." Preston stood, unwilling to let the connection slip away. "It doesn't have to be that way." "Does it not?" She faced him, moonlight silvering her features. "What place is there for me in your world, or you in mine?" "We could make our own place," he suggested, the idea forming even as he spoke it. "I have savings, enough to buy land, build something. Montana Territory, perhaps, or Wyoming, somewhere new." Kaya shook her head, though something like longing flickered across her face. "You speak impossible dreams." "Only impossible if we decide they are." Preston stepped closer, emboldened by the night and the hours of conversation. "I'm not asking for promises, just consider it. Consider that there might be more than this life for you." "I should go," she whispered, but made no move to leave. In the silver moonlight, with the gentle sound of the creek beside them, Preston slowly raised his hand to her face, giving her every chance to retreat. When she remained still, he traced the blue crescent below her eye with his thumb, a gesture of such tenderness that Kaya closed her eyes, leaning almost imperceptibly into his touch. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he murmured, "remember that someone touched you and saw only beauty." A single tear escaped from beneath her closed eyelid, tracking down her cheek to meet his thumb. The intimacy of the moment stole Preston's breath. When Kaya opened her eyes, the vulnerability there made his heart constrict. "I must go," she said again, this time stepping back from his touch. "Your cattle boss will be looking for you." Preston knew pushing further would only drive her away. "Will I see you in the morning, before we leave?" Kaya hesitated at the edge of the shadows. "I do not know." Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness with the same silence that seemed part of her nature. Preston returned to the camp deep in thought. The cowboys were settled around fires, eating their evening meal, telling stories, and maintaining the easy camaraderie of men who worked closely together. He took his plate of beans and salt pork and found a spot slightly apart, his mind still at the creek with Kaya. "You're mighty preoccupied, Adams," Bennett observed, dropping down beside him. "That Indian girl got you bewitched?" Preston stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Bennett's laugh was knowing. "Save it. Santiago saw you downstream with her. Pretty little thing, I'll grant you, but don't let it cloud your judgment. We've got a job to finish." "My judgment is fine," Preston replied evenly. "And my private conversations are my own business." "Not when they involve locals who might cause trouble." Bennett's voice hardened. "We're leaving at first light. Make sure you're with the herd, not chasing some Indian fantasy." Preston bit back a sharp retort, knowing it would only make things worse. "I'll be ready to ride." Bennett studied him for a moment longer, then nodded and moved away. Preston finished his meal in solitude, watching the stars emerge overhead and wondering if Kaya was looking at the same sky, thinking of him as he was thinking of her. Morning came too quickly, with cowboys breaking camp before the sun had fully risen. Preston saddled his horse mechanically, his eyes constantly scanning the perimeter, looking for any sign of Kaya. The cattle were already being gathered and pointed south, away from Navajo lands and toward their final destination in Santa Fe. Bennett rode up alongside him. "Take point with Jeffries. I want a fast pace today. Make up for time lost in negotiating." Preston nodded, swallowing his disappointment. If Kaya came, he would be too far ahead to see her. As he turned his horse toward the front of the herd, movement near the creek caught his eye. There she stood, half hidden by a cottonwood, watching the camp dismantle itself. Even at a distance, their eyes met, and Preston felt the same inexplicable connection that had drawn him to her from the first moment. Without thinking of consequences, he turned his horse and rode directly toward her. He heard Bennett call his name but ignored it, focused only on reaching Kaya before she disappeared again. She didn't retreat as he approached, though her posture was wary. When he pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted, she remained still, watching him with unreadable eyes. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," Preston said, slightly breathless. "I told myself I wouldn't," she admitted. "Yet here I am." "I'm glad." He stepped closer, aware of time slipping away. "Kaya, I meant what I said last night. There could be a different life." She shook her head, though the gesture lacked conviction. "You have obligations. A cattle drive to complete. Obligations that end in Santa Fe, 3 weeks from now." Preston took another step. "I could come back." "To what purpose?" Her voice held a tremor she couldn't quite conceal. "To find you. To see if what I feel, what I think we both feel, is real." He reached for her hands, taking them both in his. This time, she didn't pull away. "Unless you tell me now that you feel nothing." Kaya looked down at their joined hands. "I cannot tell you that," she whispered, "but I cannot leave my people either. Despite everything, they are all I have." "Adams!" Bennett's voice cut through the moment, closer now. "Get your ass back to the herd or find yourself another job." Preston ignored him, focusing entirely on Kaya. 3 weeks. "I'll be back in 3 weeks if you'll agree to see me, just to talk. No pressure for anything more." Kaya looked past him to where Bennett was approaching, his face thunderous. "Your boss is angry." "Let him be," Preston said dismissively. "Will you meet me 3 weeks from today at the ridge where we first met?" Indecision warred on her face, hope battling with caution, longing with pragmatism. Finally, she nodded once. "I will be there at sunset." But Preston— "I know," he said quickly. "No promises beyond that moment. I understand." Bennett was almost upon them, his horse kicking up dust. Preston squeezed Kaya's hands once more before releasing them. "Sunset, 3 weeks, the ridge." "Yes," she confirmed, then stepped back into the shadow of the cottonwood as Bennett pulled up beside them. "Adams, what the hell are you doing?" "We're burning daylight!" The trail boss looked from Preston to Kaya, his expression darkening. "Get back to the herd, now." "Well, I'm coming," Preston said calmly, mounting his horse. He looked once more at Kaya, memorizing her face, the blue crescent, the way the morning light caught in her dark hair. 3 weeks, he said again, quietly enough that only she could hear. Kaya nodded once, her eyes never leaving his face as he turned his horse and rode away with Bennett, back toward the massive cattle drive now moving steadily southward. "You're playing with fire, Adams," Bennett growled as they rode. "Getting involved with natives is asking for trouble." Preston didn't bother to respond. Bennett's opinions meant nothing compared to the promise of seeing Kaya again. As they rejoined the herd and he took his position at point, Preston felt lighter than he had in years. 3 weeks suddenly seemed both an eternity and no time at all. Behind him, unseen, Kaya watched the cattle drive disappear over the southern horizon, her heart racing with possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider before. The days following the cattle drive's departure passed in a strange haze for Kaya. She performed her duties gathering herbs, preparing medicines that few would accept from her hands, hunting small game to feed herself with the same quiet efficiency as always. But her mind constantly drifted to Preston Adams, to the feel of his hand against hers, to his impossible suggestion of a different life. The tribe noticed her distraction. Elder Maska approached her one evening as she sat outside her lodge, staring at the sunset. "The spirits are restless around you," he observed, maintaining the customary distance. "The spirits are always restless around me," Kaya replied, her tone more bitter than she intended. Maska studied her with shrewd eyes. "The cowboy, he spoke with you." It wasn't a question, but Kaya nodded anyway. "He did. And now your thoughts follow him south." Kaya said nothing, unwilling to confess the truth, but unable to deny it. Maska sighed heavily. "There is no place for such things, Kaya. You know this." "I know there is no place for me here," she said quietly. "Not truly. I exist in shadows, Elder. I am tolerated, not welcomed." The old man's face softened slightly. "The ways of the people are sometimes harsh, but they are our ways, the mark you bear." "Was once a blessing," Kaya interrupted, "before fear turned it into a curse." "Fear is powerful," Maska conceded, "more powerful sometimes than wisdom." They sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken truth hanging between them that Kaya's isolation was born of superstition, not reason, but was no less real for that. "He will not return," Maska finally said. "White men make promises easily and break them just as easily." Kaya looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were appearing. "Perhaps," was all she said. As the 3 weeks passed, Kaya found herself drawn repeatedly to the ridge where she had first encountered Preston. She would sit for hours, watching the horizon, remembering their conversations, the gentle way he had touched her face, the earnestness in his eyes when he spoke of possibilities. She tried to guard her heart, to remember that disappointment was the most likely outcome. Yet hope, that most dangerous of emotions, had taken root. Each sunset that brought her closer to their appointed meeting made it grow stronger, despite her best efforts to temper it with reason. For Preston, the journey to Santa Fe seemed interminable. The cattle moved at their own stubborn pace, requiring constant attention and management. When not directly working with the herd, his thoughts were consumed with Kaya, her strength, her isolation, the vulnerability she had allowed him to glimpse. Bennett watched him with suspicion, clearly wondering if Preston would abandon the drive before completion. The trail boss had been in the business long enough to recognize a man with divided loyalties. "Whatever you're planning, reconsider it," Bennett told him bluntly one night as they sat by the campfire. "Indian women bring nothing but trouble to white men, and white men bring nothing but heartache to them. Some lines weren't meant to be crossed." "With respect," Preston replied, keeping his voice neutral, "I'll make my own decisions about which lines to cross." Bennett shook his head. "Your funeral, Adams." He stood, tossing his coffee grounds into the fire. "Just don't expect any of us to attend it." Preston ignored the warning, as he ignored the occasional comments from other cowboys who had noticed his preoccupation. His mind was made up. The moment they delivered the cattle in Santa Fe, he would begin the journey back north, back to Kaya. The cattle drive reached Santa Fe 2 days ahead of Preston's self-imposed deadline. The herd was delivered, payment received, and the cowboys prepared for the traditional celebration that followed a successful drive. But while his companions sought saloons and brothels, Preston visited the bank, the general store, and the stables. "You're not joining us, Adams?" Santiago asked as Preston packed his duly purchased supplies onto a sturdy mule. "Got somewhere else to be," Preston replied, securing the packs. Santiago grinned knowingly. "That pretty Indian girl, huh? Bennett said you'd run back to her first chance you got." Preston didn't bother denying it. "She has a name. It's Kaya." "Well, good luck to you and Kaya," Santiago said, his grin softening to something more genuine. "Hope you find what you're looking for." "Thanks," Preston said, appreciating the lack of judgment. "Take care of yourself." With his horse, the pack mule, and supplies enough for an extended journey, Preston left Santa Fe the following morning. He rode steadily northward, camping along the trail at night, his anticipation growing with each mile that brought him closer to the Navajo territory. The return journey took less time than the cattle drive, allowing him to reach the agreed-upon meeting place a day early. Preston made camp within sight of the ridge, wanting to be visible if Kaya happened to check before their appointed time. That evening, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Preston rode to the top of the ridge, his heart pounding with hope and anxiety. He dismounted, standing at the exact spot where he had first seen Kaya, looking out over the vast landscape painted gold and crimson by the setting sun. Time stretched as the sun inched lower. Preston scanned every direction, looking for any sign of movement, any indication that Kaya was approaching. The sun touched the horizon, then began to disappear behind it, the brilliant colors fading to deeper reds and purples. Doubt crept in. Had he misunderstood? Was he a day early or a day late? Had something prevented her from coming? Or worse, had she simply decided not to meet him after all? The last sliver of sun vanished, leaving only the afterglow. Preston stood motionless, unwilling to leave despite the growing darkness and the cold weight of disappointment in his chest. "You came." He spun around at the sound of her voice. Kaya stood just a few paces away, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes reflecting the last light of day. She wore a dress of soft buckskin adorned with simple beadwork, and a small pack was slung across her back. "I said I would," Preston replied, echoing her words from their last meeting. Relief and joy surged through him. "I was afraid you wouldn't come." "I told myself I wouldn't," Kaya said, a small smile touching her lips. "Yet, here I am." The echo of their previous conversation broke the tension. Preston crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her, suddenly uncertain of his welcome after 3 weeks apart. Kaya studied his face, as if searching for changes or confirmation of something. "You look tired," she observed. "I rode hard to get here in time," he admitted, "and then worried I had the wrong day when you didn't appear with the sun." "I was watching," she said simply, "from the trees. I needed to be sure you were alone." "I am," Preston confirmed, then gestured to the distant campfire. "I made camp below the ridge. There's food, coffee if you're hungry." Kaya nodded, still maintaining a slight distance. "You said we would talk." "Yes," Preston agreed. "Just talk, I promise." They walked toward the camp in companionable silence, the twilight deepening around them. Preston's horse nickered softly in greeting as they approached. The small campfire cast a circle of warmth in the gathering darkness, and Preston added wood to build it higher. Kaya sat gracefully on a fallen log across from him, the fire between them. The light danced across her features, highlighting the blue crescent beneath her eye. Preston busied himself preparing a simple meal, giving her time to grow comfortable with his presence again. "Are you hungry?" he asked, offering her a plate of beans, bacon, and trail biscuits. "Yes, thank you." She accepted the food, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. They ate in silence for a while, the night sounds of the prairie a gentle backdrop. Finally, Kaya set her empty plate aside. "You wish to speak with me," she prompted. "What did you want to say that could not be said 3 weeks ago?" Preston set his own plate down, gathering his thoughts. "I wanted to tell you that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, that the things I said before leaving weren't just impulse or imagination." He met her gaze directly. "And I wanted to ask what you've been thinking these past weeks." Kaya looked into the fire, her expression thoughtful. "I have thought many things, that you might not return, that even if you did, nothing could come of it, that I am foolish to feel what I feel for a man I barely know." "And what do you feel?" Preston asked softly. She raised her eyes to his. "Hope," she said simply. "For the first time in 5 years, I feel hope. It terrifies me." The honest vulnerability in her voice made Preston's heart constrict. He moved around the fire to sit beside her on the log, close but not touching. "I'm not offering empty words, Kaya. When I suggested another life might be possible, I meant it. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. I have a deed here for land in Wyoming Territory, 160 acres with water rights. I purchased it in Santa Fe before riding back to you. Kaya's eyes widened as she stared at the document. You bought land? Before knowing if I would even meet you? Yes, Preston admitted. Maybe that makes me a fool, but I needed you to know I was serious. He carefully returned the paper to his pocket. I'm not asking you to leave with me tonight, or tomorrow, or even next month. I'm just asking if you're willing to consider it, to consider that there might be a place where you aren't defined by that mark beneath your eye. Kaya was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. My people would say I'm running from my fate, she finally said. Are you bound to a fate you didn't choose? Preston countered gently. We are all bound by the choices of others as well as our own, Kaya said. But, she hesitated, then continued with more strength, I have lived 5 years in shadows. I have paid whatever debt the spirits demanded of me. Perhaps it is time to seek my own path. Hope blazed in Preston's chest, bright as the fire before them. Does that mean you're considering it? Kaya turned to face him fully, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. I have more than considered it, Preston Adams. Why do you think I carry a pack? She gestured to the small bundle she had set beside her. I came prepared to leave if your words prove true. Preston stared at her in wonder, barely daring to believe what he was hearing. You're willing to come with me? To Wyoming? I'm willing to seek a new path, Kaya clarified. With you, if your offer is genuine. But I need to know what you expect of me, what place you see for me in this new life. The question sobered Preston, reminding him of the serious step Kaya was contemplating. I expect nothing beyond what you freely give, he said carefully. As for your place, he paused, searching for the right words. I see you as my partner, Kaya, equal in all things. I won't pretend it will be easy. There will be those who disapprove, who will try to make our lives difficult because of who we are to each other. But on our own land, we can build something that's ours alone. And if I wish to practice my healing ways, Kaya asked, to honor the training I received before I was marked untouchable? Then you should, Preston said firmly. Your knowledge is valuable, not something to be feared. Kaya studied him intently, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she slowly raised her hand to his face, initiating touch for the first time. Her fingers were warm against his cheek. Tentative but gaining confidence when he remained still, allowing her to set the pace of their contact. You are unlike any man I have known, she said softly. Preston turned his face slightly to press a gentle kiss against her palm. And you are unlike any woman. Perhaps that's why we found each other. In the firelight, with the vast prairie stretching around them and the stars emerging overhead, Kaya made her decision. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was both question and answer, tentative and bold, an end and a beginning. When she pulled back, Preston's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if savoring the connection. When he opened them, the emotion there made Kaya's breath catch. I will come with you, she said, the words both a promise and a leap of faith. To Wyoming. To this new life. Preston took her hands in his touch reverent. I will spend every day making sure you never regret that decision. They spent the night by the fire, talking of practical matters, the journey ahead, what they would need, the challenges they would face. As the fire burned low and the night deepened around them, they moved their bedrolls close together, not touching, but near enough to feel each other's presence as they drifted to sleep beneath the vast canopy of stars. Morning brought clarity and purpose. They packed the camp efficiently, Kaya adding her small bundle to the mule's load. Before mounting up, Preston turned to her. Is there anyone you wish to say goodbye to? Anything you need from the camp? Kaya looked toward the distant smoke of her people's fires, visible as a smudge on the horizon. Emotion crossed her face, regret perhaps, or nostalgia, but she shook her head. There's nothing there for me now, she said quietly. My path lies elsewhere. Preston nodded, understanding the finality of her decision. He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist. The closeness was new and thrilling, Kaya's back warm against his chest, her hair carrying the scent of sage and smoke. "Ready?" he asked softly, his breath stirring the strands near her ear. Kaya placed her hand over his where it rested at her waist. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady with newfound certainty. They rode northwest, toward Wyoming territory and the land that would become their home. The journey would take weeks, across varied terrain and through all manner of weather. They established a rhythm, riding during daylight, making camp at dusk, sharing meals and stories by firelight. Each day, Kaya grew more comfortable with touch, with closeness. The isolation of 5 years couldn't be undone in a moment, but Preston's patience and consistent respect created a safe space for her to rediscover intimacy at her own pace. They avoided settlements when possible, knowing their unusual pairing would draw unwanted attention. When supplies necessitated visits to trading posts or small towns, they faced the expected stares and whispers. Some places refused to serve them entirely. Others grudgingly sold goods but made their disapproval clear. Through it all, Preston remained steadfast, his hand always reaching for Kaya's, a physical reminder that they faced the world together. And each time, Kaya took his offered hand, growing stronger in her conviction that she had chosen rightly. One night, camped in a sheltered valley with mountains rising before them, Kaya shared the full story of her marking and subsequent isolation. She spoke of the medicine woman who had seen her gift, who had painted the crescent moon beneath her eye with sacred blue pigment, declaring her an apprentice healer. She described the joy of that day, the pride of her family, the respect of her tribe. The marking ceremony lasted from sunrise to sunset, she told Preston as they sat side by side beneath the stars. Each element of the design has meaning. The curve represents the moon's cycle and woman's power. The blue is for water and healing. The placement beneath the eye signifies vision beyond ordinary sight. Preston listened intently, his hand entwined with hers. "It's beautiful," he said sincerely, "as are the gifts it represents." Kaya smiled sadly. It was beautiful, until fear transformed its meaning. She described the day of the massacre in greater detail than before. The herbs she and the medicine woman had traveled far to gather, the smoke they saw rising from the direction of their camp, the horrible discovery upon their return. Her voice remained steady, but her grip on Preston's hand tightened as she recounted finding her family's bodies, trying desperately to save those still clinging to life, failing again and again. The survivors were consumed by grief and fear, she explained. They needed something, someone to blame besides the soldiers who had already gone. The medicine woman was respected, untouchable in her own way. I was merely her apprentice. It was easier to believe I had been marked for death but escaped it, bringing destruction to those I loved. "That's not fair," Preston said, echoing his words from their earlier conversation about her isolation. "No," Kaya agreed, "but it was easier than facing the truth that sometimes terrible things happen without reason or purpose." Preston raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. "Thank you for telling me," he said simply. Kaya leaned against his shoulder, the contact natural now after weeks of traveling together. "I want you to understand what you've taken on being with me. The mark will always be there. Some will see only that." "Let them," Preston said firmly. "I see you." In the mountains, they encountered a family of settlers whose wagon had broken an axle. The father had been injured trying to repair it, leaving his wife and 3 young children stranded and desperate. Preston immediately offered assistance, helping to fashion a replacement axle from a nearby tree. As he worked with tools, Kaya noticed the mother tending to her husband's wound, a deep gash that was showing signs of infection. Without thinking, she approached, offering her knowledge. "I have medicine," she said quietly, "for the wound." It will draw out infection. The woman looked at her with suspicion, eyes lingering on the blue crescent, but desperation overcame prejudice, and she nodded reluctantly. Kaya retrieved her medicine pouch from their packs, mixing herbs with water to create a poultice. As she worked, the youngest child, a girl of perhaps 4, watched with fascination. "What's that on your face?" the child asked innocently. "Is it paint?" "It is a mark," Kaya replied, continuing her work. "It shows that I know healing ways." "Like a doctor?" the girl pressed, edging closer despite her mother's warning look. "Something like that," Kaya smiled, "though I learned from plants and animals, not books." When the poultice was ready, Kaya carefully applied it to the man's wound, explaining to his wife how to change it and which signs of healing to look for. The settler grimaced at her touch but didn't pull away, the pain in his arm overriding any objections. By the time Preston finished repairing the wagon, the man's fever had already begun to subside. His wife, initially hostile, offered tentative thanks. "Where are you headed?" Preston asked as they prepared to part ways. "Oregon," the settler replied. "Heard there's good farmland." "Safe journey," Preston wished them, helping the man back onto the wagon. The youngest girl waved enthusiastically as they drove away. "Bye, medicine lady," she called. Kaya waved back, a strange tightness in her throat. It was the first time in years someone had acknowledged her healing gift rather than fearing it. "You helped them," Preston observed as they mounted up to continue their own journey. Despite their suspicion. "A healer heals," Kaya said simply. "It is what I was trained to do." Preston smiled, a flash of pride crossing his features. "You're remarkable, you know that?" Kaya ducked her head, unused to praise, but Preston caught the small smile she couldn't quite suppress. They reached Wyoming territory as autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds. The land Preston had purchased lay in a valley protected by gentle hills, with a clear stream running through it and enough flat ground for crops and grazing. A small cabin stood near the stream, rough-hewn and basic, but solid enough to provide shelter. When they crested the final rise and the valley spread before them, Preston reined in his horse, allowing Kaya to take in the view. "What do you think?" he asked, a note of uncertainty in his voice for the first time since they'd begun their journey. Kaya surveyed the land that would become her home, their home. The stream glinting in the sunlight, the meadows rich with grasses, the distant trees offering firewood and game. It wasn't the red rock canyons of her childhood, nor the open prairies of her people's recent wanderings. Yet something about it called to her, spoke of possibility. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely, leaning back against Preston's chest. "It feels peaceful." Relief washed through him, his arm tightening around her waist. "It's ours," he said simply. "All of it." They rode down into the valley together, toward the cabin that would shelter them through the coming winter and beyond. Inside, the space was sparse but clean, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small sleeping area, simple furniture left by the previous owner. Preston had arranged for basic supplies to be delivered before their arrival, ensuring they wouldn't face their first days with empty cupboards. As Kaya moved through the cabin, trailing her fingers over rough wooden surfaces, taking inventory of what they had and what they would need, Preston watched her with a mixture of hope and anxiety. It was one thing to journey together, another entirely to build a life. "Will you be happy here?" he asked when she completed her exploration. "So far from everything you've known?" Kaya considered the question seriously. "Happiness isn't a place," she finally said. "It's a choice. I choose this you, this land, this opportunity to begin again." She approached him slowly, deliberately, placing her hands on his chest. "The question is, will you be happy with me? Knowing what others will say, how they will look at us." Preston covered her hands with his. "I've never been more certain of anything," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "You are worth any difficulty we might face." In the fading light of their first day on their own land, Preston leaned down to kiss her, not the tentative kisses of their journey, but a kiss of promise and commitment. Kaya responded in kind, her initial hesitancy giving way to a hunger that matched his own. That night, in the small cabin lit by firelight, they came together fully for the first time. Preston's reverent touch healed wounds deeper than physical, his whispered words of adoration replacing years of isolation with belonging. Kaya's surrender was a gift freely given, her body learning a new language of intimacy and trust. Afterward, lying entwined beneath warm blankets, Kaya traced patterns on Preston's chest, marveling at how natural it felt to be with him this way. "What are you thinking?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "That some journeys are meant to change us," she replied thoughtfully. 5 years ago, I would never have imagined this moment. This life. Do you regret any of it? Preston's voice held a note of vulnerability. Kaya raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "The pain, the isolation, those I would change if I could, but they led me to that ridge on the day you arrived. So no, I cannot truly regret the path that brought me to you." Preston pulled her down for another kiss, his heart too full for words. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, as they settled into their new life. They worked from dawn until dusk, preparing for winter hunting, preserving meat, gathering wild foods, repairing the cabin to make it more weather-tight. Preston purchased chickens and a milk cow from a distant neighbor, establishing the beginnings of their homestead. Kaya planted a small garden of medicinal herbs close to the cabin, ensuring they would survive the winter and be ready for early spring planting. She explored the surrounding woods and meadows, learning the local plants and their properties, adapting her healing knowledge to this new environment. Word spread slowly about the unusual couple who had settled in the valley. Occasionally, a rider would appear with a sick child or injured worker, seeking the Indian healer they'd heard about. Kaya never turned anyone away, regardless of how they looked at her or what they might say behind her back. Healing was her gift, her purpose, and in practicing it openly, she reclaimed the true meaning of the mark beneath her eye. Preston watched her confidence grow with each person she helped, each successful treatment. He took pride in introducing her as "my wife," long before any official ceremony took place, daring anyone to challenge the designation. Winter arrived with a heavy snowfall that isolated them in their valley for weeks at a time. They spent the long evenings by the fire, Kaya teaching Preston her language and the stories of her people, Preston reading aloud from the few books they possessed. Their small cabin became a world unto itself, warm with shared work and growing love. When spring finally softened the land, bringing new growth and possibilities, a visitor arrived, a circuit preacher who traveled the territory performing marriages, baptisms, and burials. Preston greeted him warmly, offering hospitality while carefully gauging the man's reaction to Kaya. Reverend Miller proved more open-minded than most, accepting the offered meal from Kaya's hands without hesitation and speaking to her directly rather than through Preston. As they ate, he mentioned his purpose in traveling through the area. "I've been meaning to ask," Preston said casually, "would you be willing to perform a marriage while you're here?" The preacher looked between them, understanding dawning. "You two aren't officially wed?" "Not by white man's law," Preston replied, "though in our hearts we've been committed since winter." Reverend Miller considered this, his weathered face thoughtful. "It won't be recognized everywhere," he warned. "There are laws in some places against such unions." "We understand," Preston said, "but we'd like to make it as official as we can." The preacher nodded slowly. "Then I'd be honored to perform the ceremony." The following day, with the spring sun warming the newly green valley, Preston and Kaya stood before Reverend Miller outside their cabin. Preston wore his cleanest shirt and pants, his hair neatly combed. Kaya wore a dress she had made during the winter months, white buckskin adorned with blue beadwork that matched the crescent beneath her eye, reclaiming the mark as a symbol of healing and hope rather than isolation. The ceremony was simple but profound. They exchanged vows and rings that Preston had secretly purchased during their journey, promising to walk through life together no matter what challenges arose. When Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Preston reached for Kaya's hand as he had that first night by Silver Creek reverently, giving her the choice to accept or decline his touch. Kaya placed her hand in his without hesitation. The gesture, symbolic of all they had overcome and all they had built together. As the preacher looked on with approval, Preston pulled her into his arms and sealed their union with a kiss that spoke of passion, commitment, and the future they would create together. That evening, after the preacher had continued on his way, they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the valley in colors reminiscent of their first meeting. "Mrs. Adams," Preston said, testing the title with a smile, "how does it feel to be officially wed?" Kaya leaned against his shoulder, her hand securely in his. "It feels like coming home," she said simply, "like finding the place I was always meant to be." Preston pressed a kiss to her temple. Just beside the blue crescent that no longer separated her from the world, but marked her as the extraordinary woman who had captured his heart. "I reached for your hand that night by the creek," he murmured, never imagining where it would lead us. "And I took it," Kaya reminded him, never dreaming I would never want to let go. As darkness settled over their valley and stars emerged overhead, they remained on the porch, hands entwined, hearts beating in unison, no longer untouchable, no longer alone, but forever connected by the courage to reach across boundaries and the love that had transformed them both. The years passed with the rhythm of seasons, each one bringing new challenges and joys to the valley that Preston and Kaya Adams called home. Their small homestead grew steadily, a proper barn built in the second year. Fields cleared and planted with crops, a herd of cattle that increased each spring with new calves. The cabin expanded too, with Preston adding rooms as their needs changed, transforming the rough shelter into a true home filled with the warmth of their shared life. Kaya's reputation as a healer spread throughout the region, bringing a steady stream of people seeking her knowledge and remedies. She created a dedicated space for her work, a small structure separate from their main house where she grew, dried, and prepared her medicines, and where she could treat those who came to her in privacy and comfort. Some visitors arrived suspicious, driven by desperation rather than trust, their eyes lingering on the blue crescent beneath Kaya's eye with undisguised wariness. But most left with respect, their ailments eased by her skilled hands and deep understanding of healing herbs. Over time, she became known simply as the medicine woman of Willow Creek, her heritage and mark accepted as part of what made her gift special rather than something to fear. Preston took immense pride in his wife's growing recognition, defending her fiercely when needed, but more often simply standing aside, allowing her abilities to speak for themselves. Their partnership deepened with each passing season, the initial spark of attraction maturing into a love built on mutual respect and shared purpose. In their 5th year on the land, Kaya gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Preston's mother. The baby arrived during a spring thunderstorm, with only Preston to assist in the delivery. As he placed the newborn in Kaya's arms, both of them tearful with joy and relief, Preston was struck by how far they had come from that first meeting on the ridge. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching his daughter's dark hair, which promised to be as thick and lustrous as her mother's. Kaya looked up at him, exhausted but radiant. "She is the best of both of us," she said, the wonder evident in her voice. "A new beginning." As Sarah grew, it became clear she had inherited her mother's intuitive connection to the natural world. By the time she was 4, she could identify most of the medicinal plants in Kaya's garden and understood their basic uses. Her quick mind absorbed both English and Dene with equal facility, and she moved easily between the cultural traditions her parents shared with her. When Sarah was 6, Kaya discovered she was expecting their second child. The winter was harsh that year, isolating them for weeks at a time, but their home remained warm and secure. Preston spent the long evenings carving a cradle, while Sarah practiced her reading and Kaya sewed tiny garments, their contentment palpable in the fire-lit cabin. Their son, James, arrived as winter gave way to spring, a sturdy boy with his father's strong features, but his mother's dark, observant eyes. Sarah appointed herself his protector and teacher, taking her role as older sister with serious dedication that made both parents hide smiles behind their hands. With 2 children to raise, the Adams family's connection to the outside world necessarily deepened. Preston built a small schoolhouse on their property, inviting neighboring families to send their children for basic education. Kaya taught alongside a young woman from town who had proper teaching credentials, offering lessons in natural science and traditional knowledge alongside reading, writing, and arithmetic. The arrangement raised eyebrows. Initially, a native woman instructing white children was unusual anywhere, particularly in Wyoming territory of the 1880s. But the results spoke for themselves, and even the most skeptical parents couldn't deny that their children were receiving an education superior to anything else available in the region. Not everyone accepted the unusual family, of course. There were still those who crossed to the other side of the street when Kaya walked through town, who refused her healing services regardless of need, who whispered behind their hands about that Indian woman and her race-traitor husband. But such voices grew fewer and less significant as the years passed and the Adams family became an established, respected presence in the community. When Sarah turned 12, she approached her mother with a solemn request that caught Kaya by surprise. "I want to wear the mark," she said one evening as they worked together in the medicine house, preparing tinctures from summer herbs. Kaya's hand stilled on the mortar and pestle. "What mark do you mean, daughter?" Sarah touched the space beneath her left eye, mirroring her mother's crescent. "The healer's mark. I want to follow your path." Emotion tightened Kaya's throat. She had never hidden the history of her mark from her children, explaining both its original purpose and how fear had transformed its meaning among her people. But she had never expected Sarah to request it for herself. "The mark brought me great pain before it brought joy," Kaya said carefully. "Are you certain this is what you want?" Sarah nodded, her young face serious beyond her years. "I'm proud of what it means, what you are. I want people to know I'm learning the same ways." Kaya pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, tears threatening. "Let me speak with your father," she whispered. "This is a decision we should make together." That night, after the children were asleep, Kaya and Preston sat on their porch as they had so many nights before, watching the stars and discussing their daughter's request. "She's young to make such a permanent choice," Preston said thoughtfully. "The mark would set her apart, more than her heritage already does." "Yes," Kaya agreed, "yet I see in her the same calling I felt at her age, the same connection to healing ways." Preston took her hand, his thumb tracing over calluses earned through years of working the land alongside him. "What does your heart tell you?" Kaya was silent for a long moment, considering. "That we should honor her choice, but perhaps modify the tradition. In my tribe, the full mark was given at initiation, but apprentices often received a partial mark, a small dot that could later be expanded." Preston nodded slowly. "A compromise, then. Something to acknowledge her path without the permanence of the full mark until she's older." The discussion continued for several nights before they reached a decision. On the summer solstice, with James watching wide-eyed and Preston standing as witness, Kaya performed a simplified version of the ceremony she had experienced so many years before. Using sacred herbs and a tiny amount of blue pigment made from crushed stones and plant dyes, she placed a small dot beneath Sarah's left eye, not the full crescent, but a beginning, a promise of what might come when she reached full adulthood. "This mark connects you to the healing traditions of my people," Kaya told her daughter as the ceremony concluded. "It carries both power and responsibility. Wear it with honor." Sarah touched the mark gently, her face solemn with the importance of the moment. "I will," she promised. "I'll make you proud." "You already do," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day." As their children grew, the Adams homestead continued to prosper, They added more land when a neighboring property became available, expanding their operations to include a small apple orchard and beehives that produced honey sought after throughout the territory. Preston's careful management and forward-thinking investments ensured their financial security, while Kaya's healing practice provided not only additional income but a respected position in the community. By the time Sarah was 17, she had indeed followed in her mother's footsteps, showing remarkable aptitude for both traditional healing and the newer medical knowledge that was becoming available through books and occasional visiting doctors. Her blue dot had remained unchanged, a decision she had made herself upon turning 16, explaining that she saw no need for the full crescent when the small mark already connected her to the tradition. James, at 11, showed less interest in healing arts, but had his father's head for business and practical matters. He helped Preston with the cattle and crops, absorbing knowledge of animal husbandry and land management with natural ease. His friendship with the local blacksmith's son had led to an apprenticeship of sorts, with James spending several afternoons each week learning metalwork, a skill that proved invaluable around the homestead. On the 20th anniversary of the day Preston had first reached for Kaya's hand by Silver Creek, they held a celebration at their home, inviting neighbors, friends, and patients who had become part of their extended family over the years. The gathering was a testament to how much had changed. Native families mingled with white settlers, former skeptics raised glasses in toast to the medicine woman who had saved lives throughout the region. Children of mixed heritage played together without thought to their differences. As evening approached and lanterns were lit around the yard, Preston found Kaya standing slightly apart, watching the celebration with a look of wonder. "What are you thinking?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their years together. Kaya leaned into him, still fit and strong at 42, though silver now threaded her dark hair. "I'm thinking of that night by the creek," she said softly. "How terrified I was when you touched me. How impossible this all would have seemed then." Preston pressed a kiss to her temple, just beside the blue crescent that had faded slightly over time, but remained a distinctive part of her beauty. "Not impossible. Just waiting to be discovered." Kaya turned in his arms to face him directly. The years had added character to Preston's features, lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, a scar on his chin from a fall while building the barn, gray at his temples that she found unreasonably attractive. But his eyes were the same clear, honest, looking at her with the same admiration and desire as they had 20 years before. "You changed my life when you reached for my hand," she said, raising her palm to his cheek. "You saw me when others looked away." "Best thing I ever did," Preston replied, turning his head to kiss her palm. "Reaching for you and never letting go," Kaya finished, rising on tiptoe to kiss him properly, unconcerned with the watching eyes of their guests. From across the yard, Sarah and James exchanged knowing smiles at their parents' display of affection, a familiar sight throughout their childhood, and one that had shaped their understanding of what love could be. As twilight deepened into night and stars appeared overhead, much as they had on that first evening by the creek, Preston and Kaya stood hand in hand in the home they had built together. What had begun with a chance meeting on a ridge, a cowboy and a woman called Untouchable, had grown into a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined. The blue crescent beneath Kaya's eye, once a mark of isolation, had become instead a symbol of healing, of wisdom, of a woman who had reclaimed her power and purpose, and Preston's hand in hers, once a shocking breach of boundaries, had become the foundation upon which they had built a family, a homestead, and a legacy that would continue long after them through their children and the many lives they had touched. In a land and time when such connections were discouraged and even forbidden, they had found the courage to reach across divisions, to hold fast to each other through hardship and joy alike. Her tribe had called her untouchable, but a cowboy had reached for her hand and never let go, transforming both their lives and creating a love story that would be told for generations to come.